Welcome, dear listeners, to Whispers in the Dark, where shadows tell stories and the night breathes secrets. I'm your guide through the unknown, your storyteller in the silence, weaving tales that will haunt your thoughts long after the last word fades. Here, we embrace the eerie, the unsettling, the stories that lurk just beyond the edge of the firelight. So settle in, dim the lights, and listen closely. The darkness has something to say. So let's begin this terrifying tale, The Crimson Eyes of Blackmoore Castle. Genevieve Langdon arrived in Blackmoore, beneath a sky the color of rotted bone. The drive had been long, hours of bleak countryside, overgrown hedgerows, and narrow lanes that coiled like veins toward the sea. By the time the Bentley rolled to a halt outside the village, the late afternoon light had thickened into a bruised twilight. The driver said nothing. Neither did Genevieve. They both knew she would walk the final stretch alone. She stepped out of the car in silence, her boots sinking slightly into the damp, moss-dotted cobblestones. A sharp, briny wind sliced through her long wool coat. She welcomed it. It smelled of salt. Blackmoore village was more ghost than settlement. A cluster of slate-roofed cottages slumped together as though hiding from something older and much larger. Smoke trickled from one chimney. No children played, no voices carried on the wind. The windows she passed were dark, though she could feel eyes on her. She stopped at the edge of the square, where a low stone wall separated the village from the open coastal land. Beyond that barrier, a tangled stretch of dead fields rolled toward the cliffs, and perched atop those cliffs, Blackmoore Castle. It rose from the edge of the land like a curse carved into stone. 4 crumbling towers clawed at the sky, their tops broken like rotten teeth. Ivy strangled its walls, blackened by decades of sea spray and time. Sections of the battlements had collapsed entirely. One jagged spire listed toward the sea, as if waiting for the final push. A winding path led up to it, partially buried in mud and bramble. The wrought iron gate at the base stood warped and ajar. The land around the castle was wrong. Too quiet, too still. Crows circled high above but never landed. As Genevieve approached the gate, a voice called from behind her.
Not many go up that way anymore.
She turned to see a man seated beneath a twisted hawthorn tree, sharpening a small knife on a whetstone. His boots were caked in earth, his coat waxed and weathered. A fisherman's cap sat low over his brow. His voice was as if from an old English priest, kind and gentle.
I imagine not. The property's been abandoned for decades.
He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers.
Aye, and for good reason.
She tilted her head.
Let me guess, something about old bones and darker things.
A flicker passed through the man's expression. Not amusement, weariness.
They say the ground up there never dries, even in summer. Always slick, always sinking.
Genevieve looked up the path. The soil did glisten oddly, even without rain. She chose not to comment.
And the castle?
She asked, still watching him. His whetstone paused.
Some places remember,
He said.
Some places rot from the inside out. That one, it's been rotting a long time.
Genevieve offered a faint smile.
Well, I've dealt with rot before.
That place isn't just broken, it's waiting.
She didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked on, heels crunching over gravel, her coat snapping in the rising wind. The gate creaked open beneath her hand. As she passed through it, the sound of the village, the occasional clink of metal, the distant barking of a dog. The quiet shuffle of human life cut out entirely. The land beyond the gate was silent. No birds, no insects, only the rasp of wind through dying weeds. She followed the path as it twisted up the hill, thick with thorns and gnarled roots. With each step, the temperature dropped, though the sun hadn't yet set. Strange mounds jutted from the earth like old bones, half-buried and moss-covered. Trees lined the path in contorted shapes, limbs bent toward the castle, like they'd been caught mid-recoil. As Genevieve crested the final ridge, the castle loomed above her, in full, taller than it had seemed from the village, and far more ruined. Its walls were etched with long vertical streaks, as though water, or something heavier, had bled down them over centuries. The windows were either shattered or sealed with warped wooden boards, and the great oaken doors were sunken into their frame, rotted at the corners. A rusted crest, unrecognizable beneath corrosion, hung above the entrance. The iron studs on the door had oxidized to a deep reddish brown. A jagged crack split the stone steps leading up to the threshold. Genevieve climbed them without pause. Her hand touched the ancient door, cold, moist, too moist. With a push, it groaned open, not locked, only reluctant. The sound echoed into the dark hall beyond, as if the castle were sighing awake after a long, resentful sleep. Inside, darkness reigned. The air was thick with damp and dust. Stone walls stretched off into unseen corridors, cloaked in cobwebs and age. Her footsteps rang hollow on the flagstone floor. Drips echoed from somewhere deep within. The smell was suffocating. Earth, mold, and something faintly metallic beneath it all. She paused just past the threshold, allowing her eyes to adjust. This would be her home, her project, her throne. Blackmoore Castle had been bought, legally claimed, transferred from ancient hands into modern wealth. Its decay would be reversed. Its bones would rise anew under her will. Genevieve Langdon smiled to herself. But in the chill silence that followed her entrance, something unseen shifted far above, in the eaves or the rafters. Not a presence, not a whisper. Just a subtle suggestion that something in the castle had also noticed. The first night in Blackmoore Castle passed without sleep. Genevieve lay on the velvet-draped mattress in the old master chamber, blankets pulled to her chin, fire hissing low in the ancient hearth. The flames offered little warmth and even less comfort. Every time she closed her eyes, the wind outside seemed to change pitch. It moaned low and slow like breath through broken teeth. It scratched at the warped window panes. The room itself was massive, larger than most London apartments. The ceiling vaulted high above in ribs of blackened timber. Four-poster drapes hung heavy with age and dust, and every corner of the room seemed to whisper in draughts and quiet groans of wood. It was not just the size of the place that unnerved her, but the stillness. A kind of silence that felt like something holding its breath, listening. She awoke at dawn, uncertain whether she'd ever slept. Her skin was damp, her pulse oddly quick. She dismissed it as nerves, jet lag, the thrill of change. But by the time she stood at the leaded glass window and looked down over the surrounding land, unease had begun to pool beneath her ribs. The gardens had grown wild, more graveyard than garden now. What once might have been a topiary maze was now a collapsed snarl of hedges, their branches tangled like the veins of a dead heart. The fountain at the center was frozen in ruin, its marble basin dry and cracked. A crow perched on its edge, staring upward. The rest of the day was spent cataloging damage. The east wing had collapsed inward. The dining hall ceiling sagged dangerously. Mold devoured the tapestries in the drawing room. Doors opened onto bricked-over walls. Entire corridors looped without logic, as though the castle had rewritten itself across centuries of decay. She took notes. She sketched designs. She left sticky markers on doorways and banisters. She did not go into the west wing. By mid-afternoon, the air in the castle had shifted. Not colder, though it remained unseasonably chill, but heavier. Genevieve moved more slowly, her limbs leaden, her breath short. The walls seemed closer than they had that morning, the ceilings lower, the windows smaller. It was near dusk when she discovered the staircase, half hidden behind a crooked bookshelf in a forgotten parlor. The spiral stairs descended into shadow. The wood beneath her feet was warped but intact. She did not know what compelled her to go down. Curiosity, perhaps, or arrogance. The steps led to what must have once been servant quarters. Low ceilings, narrow halls, small stone rooms filled with the remains of cots and broken trinks. The smell here was stronger, not just dust and mildew, but something older, fungal, coppery, earth dug too deep. In one room, she found a crumbling journal, its pages eaten by mold. Only a few sentences were legible. He rides again. Saw him in the orchard, where nothing grows. Eyes like furnace coals. They say he served the first Lord Blackmoore in life. In death, he serves still. She closed the book carefully and placed it back where she found it. Upstairs, the house had darkened. She lit candles in sconces, the flames casting unsteady shadows across cracked stone and faded wallpaper. The storm had returned, soft at first, then rising. Thunder rolled somewhere distant, dragging behind it a rattle like chains. That night, she walked the halls. The castle felt alive. Doors she had opened were closed again. Windows that should have shown moonlight reflected only blackness. One hallway stretched longer than it had that morning. Another curved in a direction that made no sense. She told herself the layout was just old, unsettled. Buildings like this shifted over time. Stones settled, wood twisted, but in the stillness, there were sounds she couldn't explain. A low creaking, like someone leaning on floorboards. A soft clink, metal brushing metal. Once, while lighting a candle in a narrow corridor, she heard the distinct sound of breathing just behind her. She turned, heart hammering. No one, no draft, no wind, only the cold sensation of being watched, of being noticed. And then there was the knocking. It came from the base of the main stairwell, near the great entrance doors. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Knock, knock, knock. She froze. The air thickened. No one should have been outside. The path up from the village was treacherous now, eaten by fog and brambles. She hadn't called anyone. No deliveries, no contact. Still, the knock came again. She approached cautiously, feet silent on the old floor. At the landing above the door, she peered down. Nothing. No shape behind the stained glass panels. No flicker of shadow. No movement, just the door, slightly ajar. She didn't remember leaving it unlocked. She descended slowly, hands trembling despite herself. The doorknob was icy. She opened it wide. The grounds stretched out before her, silver in the moonlight. Fog clung to the earth, roiling in slow waves. Trees stood motionless in the distance. And there, just at the edge of the path, stood the local man from the day before. He was staring at the castle, not at her. hat pulled low, shoulders hunched.
How did you get up here?
She asked. He didn't answer at first. Then,
Wanted to see if you'd stayed the night.
I did.
another long pause. His breath came in clouds.
You should leave before the weekends.
He said softly.
Things settle different once you've been here too long.
Genevieve frowned.
Because of the legend?
He looked up at her then, eyes glassy with a weariness she could not place.
It's not a legend.
He whispered.
It's an old oath. Broken.
Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and walked back into the fog. Genevieve stood at the threshold for several minutes, chilled and unmoving. The door behind her closed on its own. The key turned with a sound like a scream, swallowed in water. Genevieve hadn't planned to enter the West Wing, not yet, but sometime in the endless, glass-eyed hours between midnight and morning, she found herself standing at the edge of it, key in hand, breath visible in the cold, dead air of the corridor. Her hand moved on its own. The key fit too well, like it had been waiting. The door resisted her first push, swollen, stubborn. Then it gave way with a wet groan. The West Wing was colder, older. The temperature dropped several degrees the instant she crossed the threshold. It wasn't just chill, it was absence. As if warmth had never lived here, as if it had been carved out and replaced with something raw. Dust blanketed everything, but not the usual kind. This was heavier, clumped in thick drifts like ashes. The floor beneath her boots gave soft, almost damp creaks, and when she brushed her hand along the hallway wainscoting, something red flaked off beneath her fingertips. Not paint. The corridor was narrow and crooked, running deeper into the wing like a tunnel bored through flesh. The walls seemed closer the farther she walked, the ceiling lower. The air was thick with the scent of old iron, mildew, and something sweetly rotten. She passed doors, shut tight, their brass handles dulled by age. Some bore marks. Slash, gouge, symbols carved into the wood by trembling hands. One door was wrapped in old rope, crusted with salt. Another hung open slightly, showing only a room of shattered mirrors. She did not go in. Further in, she found what had once been a gallery. Paintings lined the wall. Tall, narrow, many with the faces scraped off. Those that remained had eyes that bulged unnaturally wide. One canvas had been torn from corner to corner, yet its subject, a black armored figure mounted on a rearing horse, remained untouched in the center. The knight's head turned to follow her as she passed, or so it seemed. The silence was absolute now. No wind, no groaning stone, just her breath, loud in her ears. Her heart beat with the muffled rhythm of a war drum. A door at the end of the hallway was different. Not wood but iron, blackened and streaked with rust. A symbol had been branded above it, an unholy knot of circles and teeth. She reached for the handle, but stopped. There was something behind that door, not a noise, but a presence, like heat pressing against cold skin. Instead, she turned into an adjoining room, a bedroom, or what was left of one. The walls sagged. The fireplace was choked with bone-dry feathers and something darker, fur. The bed frame had collapsed under the wake of time, and the sheets were fossilized into rigid, blood-colored ridges. On the far wall, words had been scratched into the stone. He watches. He waits. He remembers. The writing ran down into the floor, as if the last message had been written from a prone position, with fingers or nails. Genevieve stumbled back into the corridor, pulse racing. Her hands were numb. She didn't remember walking farther. Yet the next moment she stood at the top of a tight spiral staircase. It led downward, always downward. The stone beneath her feet was wet, as if the air itself were sweating. She descended. The staircase twisted impossibly. The castle should not go this deep. Her flashlight flickered, dimmed, then died completely. She continued in near blackness, guided only by the oppressive press of the stone and the bone-deep sense of going somewhere wrong. When her foot finally touched level ground again, the silence shattered. A whisper, not a voice. A scrape, metal on stone. The corridor ahead pulsed red for an instant, as if somewhere, behind the walls, something had blinked. The space opened into a long, crypt-like hall. Stone coffins lined the walls, each one sealed by rusted plates, though many were broken, lids cracked or shattered, contents missing. The smell here was indescribable, ancient, fungal, wrong. And in the center of the room stood a chair, a throne, made of bone and antler, blackened by fire. Behind it rose a tall slab of stone, carved with dozens of names, all scratched out save one, Langdon. Genevieve stepped forward, compelled. At the base of the throne lay an object, a helmet, charred and pitted, its faceplate shaped like a snarling maw. Dried blood stained the inside rim. She picked it up. A sound roared in her ears. Not from the room, from inside her head. A screech like metal torn by teeth, followed by the rhythmic beat of hooves. She dropped the helmet. It clanged once. Then silence returned. But something had changed. The air was no longer still. The shadows no longer passive. Behind her, a door opened with a groan. Not the one she entered through. Another. She turned, but saw only darkness. Yet in that darkness she felt it. Something watching. She fled through corridors that seemed different than before. Up staircases that bent wrong. Past rooms she had not seen on her descent. Her own breath deafened her. Her heart threatened to crack. She did not stop until she reached the main hallway again, gasping, candlelight flickering against the cold sweat on her brow. The castle had changed. The air was thicker, the walls darker, and outside, beyond the frost-laced windows, the sea groaned like it too had been awakened. Genevieve locked her door that night. It would not matter. Nothing within Blackmoore Castle truly stayed locked. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Genevieve lay beneath her heavy quilt, still dressed, eyes open, body rigid as stone. The fire had long since died. The room was cold enough to frost the mirror, but she didn't dare move, because something had touched the door handle. It was subtle. A creak, so soft it could have been the house settling, but the sound came again, and this time it lingered. A hand, slowly wrapping around brass. The door shivered in its frame. She stared at it, waiting, breath held, but it did not open, not yet. When morning came, it brought no warmth, no sun, just a grey pall that spilled across the cliffs and made the sea below look like a great iron mouth. Genevieve stepped outside, wrapped in layers, her nerves raw. The fog was thicker than it had ever been. Heavy, yellowish. It poured across the grounds like something alive, obscuring the stables, the gatehouse, the road. She could not see 20 feet ahead. Yet, she heard hooves, distant. Slow, deliberate, she strained her ears, turned toward the sound. Nothing. Only fog. Then, again, closer. Clop, clop, clop. But no horse emerged. And yet her breath shortened. Her skin crawled. The pressure of being watched grew unbearable. She stumbled back inside, bolting the door behind her. Inside, the castle had grown darker. Not from shadow, light itself seemed repelled. Even candles burned low and yellow, like afraid to offend. Paintings had shifted. Portraits that once looked past her now turned slightly toward her. The one of the rider in black, its background was darker now. The steed's eyes had turned red. She was certain they hadn't been before. She wandered the halls restlessly, half in a dream. Her reflection in the windows lagged a second behind her steps. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the drawing room no longer kept time. Each tock came slightly too late, like the beat of a dying heart. That afternoon, she walked past the music room and heard the piano. A single note, sustained, faint. She opened the door. No one was there, but a red, wet handprint stained the white keys. The smell of sea brine was suddenly everywhere, stronger than before, thick enough to sting her eyes. She turned, fleeing the room, and found herself somewhere else. She had taken 3 steps, but was no longer in the corridor. Instead, she stood in the dining hall, but it was wrong. The windows were bricked over. The long table had been flipped, as if in a violent struggle, and along the walls, the wallpaper sagged and pulsed like living skin. She stumbled back and was in the corridor again. The same corridor. The castle is folding itself, she thought. It was no longer merely haunted. It was awake. That night, it began in earnest. The first scream came at 1:13 a.m., sharp, echoing, and inhuman. It seemed to tear straight through the stone. She sat upright in bed, heart slamming. Then, silence. Then came the thunder. No, not thunder. Hooves. She ran to the window. The fog was gone. The cliffs below were clear. And across the lawn, galloping at a measured pace, was a rider. The horse was massive, coal-black, lathered in sea foam, its flanks torn with scars that leaked mist, chains dragged from its saddle, clinking over frostbitten grass. Its rider was worse, clad in ancient, battle-scarred armor, blackened by fire and time, no flesh visible. His helm bore antler-like spikes, fused with rust and bone, and his eyes were molten pits of crimson, burning through the slits of the visor like open wounds. The Black Knight of Blackmoore. He did not charge, he circled. Once, twice. On the third pass, he turned his head upward, slowly, mechanically, until his gaze met hers through the high window. He saw her. She fell back from the glass, breath caught in her throat. She didn't move, didn't blink. When she looked again, the field was empty, but the house was no longer silent. Heavy footfalls echoed from the grand staircase, one at a time, slow, deliberate, iron on stone. Something had come inside. Her candle guttered and died. In the darkness, the cold pressed in. Then, at the end of the corridor, movement. A shape stood there, just beyond her door. Its shadow stretched toward her, impossibly long, as if it reached through dimensions. The handle on her door turned once, then again, and then the voice came. Not a voice, a whisper, carved from ice and hate.
Leave, destroyer. Here do nothing.
She backed away until her spine hit the far wall. The whisper wrapped around her mind like a vice, dragging her toward unconsciousness. Then, as if some line had been crossed, the door burst open. Not physically, but spiritually. The wind screamed through the house, every window shattering inward. The chandeliers swung wild. Fire erupted in the hearths, and then died all at once. And the night stood in her threshold, not fully formed, no, not yet, but tall, watching, a void in the shape of vengeance, and before she could scream, before she could move, he vanished. No sign remained, no hoofprints, no blood, just the faint sound of iron breathing, and from somewhere deep beneath the castle, the whisper of chains slivering across stone. She hadn't spoken in days, not to herself, not to the silent halls, not even in her sleep, though her mouth often opened in the night, jaw locked in silent scream. The castle had stopped pretending. The walls no longer creaked. They groaned. Every window reflected things behind her that were not there. Footsteps came in pairs now, her own and someone else's, always just one beat behind. And sometimes the corridors led her in circles, doorways reforming behind her, sealing her off from places she'd already walked. The staff had never arrived. The outside world had gone silent. No roads, no phones, no sky. The land itself seemed trapped in dusk. Today, she woke with her feet already walking. The castle was pulling her downward, the stone beneath her soles, bare, cold. She hadn't dressed. She didn't remember standing up. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts, like a woman walking into her own grave. And still, she walked down staircases that had never existed before, through corridors where the ceiling arched with living vines, veins pulsing faintly. Paintings lined the walls, none of which she'd ever seen before. They depicted scenes too old to be true. A battlefield of black horses trampling naked men and women into the mud. A crimson-eyed knight impaling a priest with a blade as long as a man's body. A woman tied to a throne of bone. The woman looked like her. At the base of the castle, beneath even the crypt, she came to the door. It was not a door as she understood it. It was an opening in the earth itself. Black stone, ringed by claw marks. On it, the symbol she had seen scrawled in blood weeks ago. 3 vertical slashes over a weeping crown. She touched the stone. It wept warm blood. The door opened. She descended. This time, there were no torches. No flickering phone light. Just red illumination, sourceless, as though the air itself bled faint light. And then she heard it. The breathing, deep, animal. Wrong, it came not from a single place, but all places. As though the walls were lungs, drawing in rot and exhaling despair. The corridor narrowed until she had to crawl, and then it opened. She entered a chamber vast and circular, hewn from ancient volcanic rock. The smell was unbearable, sulfur and meat left to spoil in the heat. In the center stood the throne, the real throne, not of bone, of bodies, twisted, petrified corpses fused into an obscene sculpture, all writhing in silent agony. Their mouths agape, eyes still wet. Above it, suspended in the air by chains made of knotted hair and sinew, hovered a crown. The crown of Blackmoore. It was a circlet of black iron, each point tipped with a shriveled finger bone, and at its center pulsed a single red gem. No, not a gem. An eye. It blinked. Genevieve screamed and fell to her knees. and the eye blinked again. It was watching her. The breathing grew louder, closer. Her ears bled from the pressure. Behind her, the sound of hooves echoed across stone, though there was no floor behind her. Still, she did not turn. She couldn't. She crawled forward, trembling, every muscle screaming. The crown descended, slow, inevitable, and a voice filled the chamber. Not words, not a language, but a meaning, pressed into her skull like a nail into soft wood.
You not inherit, you surrender.
The throne accepted her. She didn't sit, she collapsed onto it. And the moment her body touched the twisted limbs, the crown descended, landing with a hiss on her brow. The eye flared open. Her back arched. She screamed until her voice broke. Then, silence. The chamber vanished. The castle sighed. The sea, for the first time in weeks, was calm. By dawn, the winds had ceased. The fog was gone. The birds had returned. And from the outside, Blackmoore Castle looked peaceful, empty, as though no one had lived there for years. A group of hikers passed by that week. They took photographs of the cliffs. One of them, glancing through binoculars, saw a figure standing in the high tower, just barely. He waved. She did not move, just watched. And her eyes, even through the glass and the distance, were unmistakably red. A fisherman out of Dunraven reported it first. What he swore was a white-gowned woman walking barefoot across the surf at dawn, far from shore, head tilted as if listening to something the tide itself whispered. She vanished before he could raise his binoculars. No missing persons were reported. No one came looking. Blackmoore Castle was deemed abandoned once again, a failed renovation by a vanished heiress. Nothing new. Locals muttered, pubs laughed, but no one dared approach the grounds. Not anymore. Then the fog returned, only over the castle, thick, unnatural. Day or night, the cliffs were cloaked in it, the air electric with pressure like before a storm. Animals no longer grazed near the perimeter. The path leading up from the road became overgrown in a matter of weeks. One hiker tried to break in, just one. His friends said he was quiet when they found him, sitting outside the rusted gate, clothes soaked in brine, though it hadn't rained in days, eyes wide, unblinking, clutching something in his hand, a finger bone, still wearing a gold ring, engraved with a single name, Genevieve. He never spoke again. They say if you stand at the cliffs on a moonless night and listen closely, you can hear the wind twist your name, just once, before silence falls like a curtain. Some say they've seen her in the tower. Others have glimpsed the black horse at the edge of the sea. Not now, because Blackmoore Castle no longer sleeps. It watches and waits. Thank you for listening to Whispers in the Dark. If you'd like to support the show, head over to our Patreon, where you can sign up to one of 3 different tiers. Or, if you'd prefer to make a one-off contribution, maybe you'd like to buy me a coffee. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and YouTube to stay up to date with new episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and more chilling tales. And remember, you've heard the whispers. But some doors, once opened, never truly close. If you feel something watching tonight, don't look back. We'll see you next time, if the dark lets you go.